In addition to public comment on agenda items, the commission offers an open forum whereby citizens may comment on governance issues over which the city of Nacogdoches has domain. In accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, members of the commission shall not discuss, deliberate, or make any decisions on topics not posted as an agenda item. Speakers should address all remarks to the commission and limit your remarks to no more than 3 minutes. And also, I'd say anyone that's addressing the commission tonight, if you could state your name and address, please, and limit your time. Obviously, we don't have a lot of people here, so. Moving into the consent agenda, 4A, approval of the minutes. Consider approval of the minutes from the February 13th, 2023 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Has my fellow commissioners had an opportunity to look over those minutes? And if so, do we have a motion? When ready.
I make a motion that we accept the minutes as printed.
I second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay. Okay. And that carries. We'll move into regular agenda. 5A, consideration, discuss possible action on items removed from consent agenda by commission action. So we'll move on to 5B, public hearing, consider a request for approval of a zone change from PD, planned development, to R1 single family for approximately 0.5 acres, being lot 54-A-1, City Block 54, generally located along Post Oak Road, approximately 1,200 feet south of Sir Galahad. Did I say it? Is that Galahad Drive? Did I say that correctly?
I believe so.
This request has been submitted by Tim Ward, case file ZON 2023-02. Madam Planner.
Thank you, Chairman. Atlanta Helton, City Planner. This is a half-acre tract located on the west side of Post Oak Road. It's part of a planned development district that, based on our research, dates back all the way to the 1970s. And so we weren't able to actually find the original PD document, but what we think it was for single family, since the other two vacant lots are developed as single family. Either way, due to the age of the PD, it is expired, and so any development of the property would either have to amend that PD or, like we're doing this evening, changing the zoning to a different district that would allow for the development of a single-family home. And so the property owner has requested to change the property zoning from PD to single-family to be more in line with the adjacent properties and to market it for a future residential development. The future land use plan designates this area as rural, and this is common for areas on the periphery of the city and areas that that aren't as densely populated as other areas of the community. And so staff finds that the request fits in with the stated uses of the future land use plan. These are just some photos of the property. You can see this, our zoning sign right out front. It is a flat, undeveloped piece of property, and it's been cleared for development, but no development has actually taken place. These are some character images of some of the other properties in town or in the area. The photo on the upper left, that's the home actually just north of the property, and to the south is a church. But the church takes access to Northeast Stallings, so there's no commercial or church traffic onto Post Oak Road, so it is very residential in nature. This is, the photo on the top is actually right across the field. It's a large tract that's zoned agriculture and is currently undeveloped. And then you can see, based on the photos on the bottom, kind of the rural character of this section of Post Oak Road. So as part of the process, we send letters to all property owners within 200 feet. In this case, we had 6 different property owners that received letters. To date, we haven't received any written opposition. We have received 3 different phone calls. 2 of the phone calls were in support of the request, and then 1 was just asking general questions. And so we didn't get any opposition or any concerns about the zone change request. These are the criteria for approval that we use whenever we're reviewing a request for a zone change application. We went through these criteria in detail in the staff report, so I won't go over them now, but if the commission wants to get into the weeds of any one piece, then we're more than happy to do that. And again, the request is for a zone change from PD plan development to R1 single family to market the property for future single family development. And with that, we'll conclude our presentation. The property owner is in attendance, Mr. Ward, if the commission should have any specific questions. And with that, I'll open up for questions from the commission.
Mr. Ward, are you the buyer of the property or the current owner of the property? I noticed there's a for sale sign on it.
First it's Tim Ward and address is.
Come up. If you don't mind, please, sir, thank you so much.
Just take my name and address?
Yeah,
or-
please.
Okay,
It's just for record and.
Tim Ward, and my address is 475 County Road 404, Nacogdoches, Texas. So it's my mom's property, but I'm POA owner, and she's going through some health problems, so we're trying to take care of medical needs. And so we are like the seller,
Okay.
and I'm here for her.
Are you hoping that this, or are you planning this would be just a single lot to a single person to build a single house? Is that the plan?
Yes, and that's because on the street, it is all just single homes, and then, like I said, like kind of adjacent fronts, like a church that faces the loop.
Okay.
Is that any more questions?
Any other questions? Okay, thank you,
All
sir.
right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
But Elena, you could fit two houses on there, but based on the 8250.
Possibly, I haven't looked at the dimensions of the property. For R2, it's a 50-foot lot width, but for for R1, it's 60. And so I'm not quite sure exactly the frontage, but that's something we could definitely take a look at.
Okay, acreage-wise, it fits, but.
Yeah, so acreage-wise, I'm just not sure about the actual width of the lot
I see what
as
you
it fronts
so
the
it has
street.
to- It would have to be 100 feet wide or 200 feet?
It would have to be approximately 120 feet wide in order to make
Yes.
sure,
Road frontage?
yes, ma'am. Mhm.
Any other questions for her?
No, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Is there anyone else have any comments? I think that's it. Okay, we'll close for public comment. And any discussions here local or with this group? Does anyone have a motion?
I make a motion to approve.
I'll second it.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Okay, so it carries. Thank you, Mr. Ward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's quick and painless.
We tried to make it painful, but it didn't.
Moving on to work session 6A, to receive an update on the NAC Together Master Planning Project.
All right, thank you again, Elena Helton, City Planner. We also have Keith Walzak on the call. He's our project manager from DTJ Design. And so I'm going to cover the majority of the presentation and then ask him to jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. He's also available for questions whenever we get into the Q&A with the commission. So we did a similar presentation back in December with this group, just giving an update on where we were at in the process. At that time, we were still kind of doing an ongoing review of guiding principles and goals, but now we're on to specific policies and strategies. And those guiding principles and goals really are an ongoing process, and they are directly related to the policies and strategies. So as we revise those policies and strategies, the idea is there may be some tweaking to some of those overarching goals and guiding principles. But that's where we're at right now. All right, so again, in December, we gave an update to the City Council and the Planning and Zoning Commission on where we were at in the process. At that time, we went over engagement steps and outreach efforts that we had conducted up to that point. We also went over a summary of the various committee meetings that have been conducted so far. And then we went over next steps and project timeline. Several of the attachments that were included were the existing conditions report for the comp plan and downtown plan, and also just some preliminary findings and a preliminary draft of the engagement report, which documents all of our public engagement that we've done so far. Since then, DTJ has been compiling the public feedback, and they've started to draft those policies and implementation documents, and the committees are in the process of reviewing and discussing those now. So they are in that process of getting into the weeds of the text of the plans and having the discussions about the different elements and going through that kind of revise and repeat process with the consultant and staff. So these are just some of the things that we've done since that December update. So as far as outreach, we've had a focus group with our housing community. We also had a specific focus group that covered arts, culture, and recreation. So these are things that are parks and recreation, but also our private held properties or privately held venues that offer cultural and art entertainment as well. We also had a meet and greet at the Fredonia Brewery where we had the consultants come out and have a beer with the community and just get to know them and answer questions. And we also wrapped up a housing and economic development survey in February. So we're going to see that input incorporated into the plan. And we've also been conducting SFA campus outreach with the help of our special project assistants, Remy and Tori. So some of the committee tasks that have been completed since December, and these are both the Comprehensive Plan Committee and the Downtown Committee. So the Comprehensive Plan Committee has reviewed the guiding principles and goals. They've also reviewed the housing study and the recommendations found in that study. Last meeting, we went over the future land use classifications. So in the comprehensive plan, you have the future land use plan, and it has different categories of land uses. So residential, commercial, industrial, and as part of this process, we're looking at revising that map and also maybe tweaking some of those different land use categories. So they've reviewed that and provided some feedback, and now they're reviewing that first overall comprehensive plan draft. So this is the actual plan document. It's not perfect yet because it doesn't have all the pretty bells and whistles and images and maps, but essentially it's just a Word document with all that content, and they're going through that document now. We'll actually be meeting this Thursday, and we're hoping to start reviewing some of those materials as well. The Downtown Master Plan Advisory Committee has also reviewed the guiding principles and goals document. They've also reviewed some downtown initiatives to help provide some catalyst projects in the downtown. They've also reviewed the implementation strategies document, and they just reviewed the first downtown master plan draft as well. So they're very busy going through those documents and providing feedback for our staff and the consultant. Okay, so where are we now and what's next? So far, the deliverables that we received are, remember that downtown and comprehensive plan existing conditions report, downtown design sketches that were developed through that downtown design charrette that we had with the community and some stakeholders back in the summer, draft engagement report, which outlines all of that public engagement that we did, including surveys, community events, on-the-street engagement, so on and so forth. Draft housing study. Oh, no, I skipped one. Vision and guiding principles for the downtown and comprehensive plan. And then, again, the last two are those first drafts of the downtown and master plan, of the downtown master plan and the comprehensive plan. And so next, we're just we're continuing to review and refine those drafts. We're also looking forward to the first draft of the future I-69 corridor study, which we're hoping to get later this month. And then they're going to start looking at the policies and implementation strategies. So looking at those goals that we've established, how do we implement those? How do we develop those into policies and then have specific actions to make sure that those things are carried through? And then once the committee sign off on those, then we'll have a public review and comment portion and a completion date. Now, because it's taken a little bit longer than anticipated to go through the actual drafts, we've kind of shifted the timeline. So we're looking at April, May for that public review and comment portion, and then May, June for completion date and final adoption. So as things progress, these dates may be subject to change because we don't want to rush anything. It'll take as long as it takes, but we're going to continue working towards a completion date. And with that, I know I went through it kind of quickly. I wanted to leave room for questions from the commission so we can make sure that we utilize Keith's time as well. So with that, I'll open it up for questions unless Keith wants to give some quick comments before we get started. Keith?
No, Elena, that was great. That's a great summary. I'd be happy to answer any questions I can.
All right. And I think we had some specific questions about walkability and how that worked with the comprehensive plan. And so I know that was a topic that we wanted to make sure that we covered. So I just wanted to remind the commission about that.
Hi, Keith. Oh,
No,
go
you
ahead.
go.
No, go. It will, of course, be Maggie and myself. Good to see you again.
Hi, Keith.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
And it's, we did have you on the last time for our presentation, but we didn't really get to ask you many questions. And I'm curious to know, when you jumped into this project, Francois actually left it. When did you come on board to do this master plan and downtown master plan for Nacogdoches? Do you remember?
Oh, it was late October.
Okay. And I ask you because as you come in, are there any sticking points or pain points that you've found so far that we as commissioners can help in answering any questions or providing any input to what you're needing?
Well, that's very nice of you to ask that question. It really is. We did, I think, a really great job at DTJ in making sure that transition from Francois to me was seamless from your point of view. I immersed myself into the process as fast as I could. And it's not uncommon to run into, your project is rather unique because you really have three different plans. You have a comprehensive plan, the downtown, and the corridor. And so navigating through those three sets of plans has really been critical. And the most important piece that's connecting all those pieces together is the future land use map and designations that Elena just talked about. Getting those things defined because they do tend to impact the other two plans, right? So we've done a pretty good job. We had some really great sessions with Elena to get those designations nailed down. And so it'd be really great to make sure that you all as a commission, evaluate that future land use map as well. The only other aspect, and this is not unusual, is there's always lots of questions about where does the data come from? What are the population projections? In some cities that we work in, it's all about population projections and can we actually accommodate growth? Well, you don't necessarily have that as a primary issue, but certainly housing stock, quality, affordability, those issues are really key. And then how much, I remember when I was down there last time when we were all talking together, how much of the housing stock in the city is owned versus renter occupied, and what do the influences of those folks who are living outside the city have on your community in terms of job balance, transportation impacts, and overall value of homes when you look at both the city and the county together. So I'm working with Elena on that. I'm working with Jason to try to find that information that we can present to you all so that you have the most accurate information and assessments in front of you. So it's been going pretty well, and I really appreciated the questions that you all had the last time I was down there. I think it was very helpful. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, and iterating that, there is a huge commuter population that comes in from outside of this county. And in that meeting last time with City Council, what we observed was that we were looking majority of it into Nacogdoches, and yes, there was an issue, I think, in disparity, and actually looking to see the population growth and influx in and out of the city. So I appreciate you taking those concerns to heart and actually looking at the data set so that we can have something that's more in line with what I think our city needs. And then the other question I had for you too is I know that you just got thrown onto this project is like your background. I know that you've been in this for a long time, but can you give us a little bit of information on your background so that we know who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for the question. I have been in the business of urban planning, policy planning, urban design for over 35 years. I've worked primarily in Western United States. And when I say Western, I say west of the Mississippi. I have worked in mountain states regions. I've worked in desert regions, California. I've worked in communities of all sizes and shapes. I've worked in tourist communities. I've worked in communities that are similar to your community, where you're really trying to attract people to your community and try to deal with basic infrastructural issues. So these things are not uncommon to me. I started out my career working in design development, working for architects and builders and developers, doing private development, small homes. And then I wanted to use my planning degree. And so my first planning position was the city of Tempe, which is in the metropolitan Phoenix area where Arizona State University is. And I worked as a planner there for 4 years, doing long range planning and design review, development review. And I really got my feet wet with the public planning process. I developed a real strong interest in multimodal transportation. And so then I went down to Tucson, Arizona, and worked for 10 years with the Department of Transportation doing multimodal transportation planning for the city of Tucson for about a decade or more. And I've continued to use that same thought process of understanding how development works, how public land use planning policy works, but also how multimodal transportation systems work together. So it was really beneficial for me to actually start out in land use planning, urban design, then go into mobility.
Sure.
And so I continue to do that. And I've probably have 17, 18 years of experience in public sector municipality work. And the balance of my work is in commercial development and consulting.
Wonderful, thank you. It's very extensive, and I'm glad to hear it. You are very well versed, and I appreciate your time, so thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I have a lot of questions about the process, and just that I don't really understand how it works going from, well, a couple of things. First of all, you said that the policy and strategies for implementation, that section is in progress. How does that relate to actually changing ordinances to, I know you had talked about a code review at some point, but these policies and strategies, who reviews that at the stage that we're at right now? Who's writing that? And are we far enough along with just agreeing on the goals? Because I hear a lot of talk in the community about kind of battle lines being drawn about certain issues. I don't know if battle lines is probably too strong of a word, but just differences in opinion about some really important issues that, so I'm just wondering how does this all shake out? And the same question applies to this land use plan. How does that relate to zoning changes? Or is there an opportunity to do a mass zone change? And if so, how does that happen? Is that something that we do, that we talk about, or is it something that has to go before city council? I'm sorry, that's a lot of questions, but I just.
Well, and Keith, I'm gonna let Keith answer part of it, and I'm gonna answer the other part. So the policies and strategies, they will direct staff and city council to do certain things. So they may direct staff to do an audit of our development code and review the development code to make sure it's up current with current development trends, to make sure that it's not impeding any kind of development that we want to get. And so, but the plan won't include like draft ordinance changes. So it won't actually include, red line copy of the ordinance that says change A, B, and C, but it'll direct staff to say, you need to review your development code and make changes to make sure that you're not actually impeding the type of development that you say that you need. Does that make sense? And I can let Keith expand upon that. He'll probably do it more eloquently.
No, I can't do it as well as you, that's for sure. Yeah, I think the thing to keep in mind is that we're working at a policy level. The comprehensive plans, downtown vision plans, they're guiding documents, they're advisory. They're not in the same category as your development code, which is a legally binding document. And so what you're doing is, as a planning commission and as city council, is you're taking all this information in from the initial part of your question was to talk a little bit more about the process. What we do is we take in information from the community. And at the far left of this diagram, it's really trying to summarize what those key values are in your community. And then working through this progression to develop guiding principles and goals that ultimately end up in policies and strategies. None of that information is still legally binding like a zoning code. So the recommendations that you might see in these documents are, as Elena just pointed out, if you really want to see, as an example, more housing typologies in your downtown, for instance, or you want to see more mixed-use development, there might be things about your zoning code that are inhibiting that from happening. I'm not saying that there is, but there might be. And so what we're doing is we're identifying those gaps, and we're trying to make recommendations and formulate policies that gives you the directive to then move forward into the next step, which is, as Elena pointed out, doing a citywide, what's called a code audit. Code audit is kind of like a cursory look at your zoning code. It's not a complete update, but it's an audit to evaluate and reconcile things like mixed-use development. We want to see more of that. We want to see walkable communities. And does your code actually allow for that to happen today? That's what the code audit does. It's not as heavy a lift as a full zoning code update. It's the first next step you want to take moving forward towards a zoning code update. So all we're really trying to do is help work with you to identify where are those gaps, or where are those barriers that are preventing you from enabling yourselves to achieve the vision that you have for your community. And again, I'm hearing mixed use development, walkable communities, safe streets, housing typologies that meets all kinds of income levels. Those are the kinds of things that we've identified as values, and now we're working toward implementation strategies. How do you get those values to happen in the next 5 to 10 years?
Can you talk about the land use plan? Because it sounded like, I mean, what I picture is some people sitting around a map of Nacogdoches changing the land use plan. That's what I'm picturing in my mind. So at some point, that needs to happen, but I want to know how that happens and who's sitting at the table.
Yeah, Elena, do you want me to?
Yeah,
take a
so,
shot?
so the committee, the comp plan committee, they will review a updated future land use plan, and they'll give input on where those future land uses should be located in the community, as far as industrial, commercial, residential, and so they'll have a hand in that and help, and help staff and the consultant decide where those where those best fit in the community, and then those will be reviewed by the general community as part of that overall public input, and then the commission will review that as part of your, as part of the overall comprehensive plan document, and then gets approved by city council. So the committee reviews and essentially has a hand in creating that actual revised plan. The public reviews it, and then you guys will actually review and make a recommendation on it before it goes to city council for final adoption. So that's the actual process for the review and update of that future land use plan map document.
And that is not the same as the zoning maps?
No, ma'am.
They're different.
Yes, ma'am.
They should agree, but they don't always agree. Is that correct?
Well, the idea is that your future land use plan shows you where you want to grow in the future. Sometimes it does memorialize existing land uses. So if there's an existing kind of established single-family neighborhood, that should be shown as single-family, even though it's future. That's what's there today. And so the idea is that shows existing, but also areas that haven't been developed yet that you want to grow to in the future. Whereas the zoning tells you what you can do there today, what the property is currently entitled for. So the future land use is a guide that says generally we want residential development here. Generally, we think new commercial development should happen here, and just provide some guidance and direction. So when you guys are reviewing those zone change requests, you can refer back to the map and say, is this where, we decided that we wanted to grow this type of use in the future?
So can the land use plan that comes out of this process be used to initiate zone changes? And do the requests for the zone change have to come from the property owner? Because I can think of a lot of really legacy zoning that doesn't really fit anymore, and I wish it would be changed now before somebody decides that they want to. And I'm thinking of an example in my own neighborhood where there's probably, I don't know, maybe 50 to 100 acres, and it's all undeveloped woods with a reservoir and a stream. I think the reservoir is gone, but it's zoned R4, and it's completely surrounded by R1.
Yeah.
So why can't that be changed now?
That's an excellent question. So oftentimes, cities will initiate zone changes, like a citywide zone change or a broader zone change for a specific area, like a neighborhood or an entire block, in order to implement a comprehensive plan, or it could be another long-range plan. It could be an economic development plan. It could be a multimodal plan. And so the city does have authority to initiate zone change proceedings in certain areas. Typically, that's done, like I said, as part of the implementation of a comprehensive plan. And so it's a tool commonly used for that. And the best practice is to talk to those neighbors first to make sure that they're on board, and because a lot of people don't like you changing their property without their permission. But to answer your question, yes, it's a common tool that cities use, but it's not for lot by lot specific properties. It's usually done on a broader scale. So think an entire street or a section of a street, or a large tract like the one that you mentioned that could have significant impacts on an area.
Question just on that. So the city does that or wants to initiate a change from R4 to, let's say, R1 to be in harmony with the rest of the area. Does the landowner have to agree to that? Just out of curiosity.
Not for a city-initiated zone change, but it's very difficult if you don't have that property owner support, just because it's not politically popular. But no, they don't have to have their permission if it's city-initiated.
Does that recommendation?
That could, you could run the risk of
Lawsuits. and-
lawsuit, takings, things like that. So it's always, something that you run the risk of that route if you don't have their permission or if they're not supportive.
Just curious. Thank you.
Yes, Maggie?
I can't remember what I was going to say. Does that recommendation often start with P and Z, or does it start, it starts, I guess, as a result of reviewing the comprehensive plan?
So typically if, once you adopt the comprehensive plan, you'll essentially create a plan of work. And the comprehensive plan will have the policies and strategies, and they'll have timeframes associated with them so that they may say, okay, this strategy is priority 1, we're going to do that in the first 1 to 2 years. And then each strategy will have kind of a time frame for when that should be completed and who completes it. And so one of the strategies could be, city-initiated zone change for areas that don't comply with the future land use plan. So that could be year 2 or 3, and the city would develop a plan in conjunction with the Planning and Zoning Commission and say, okay, Planning and Zoning Commission, staff's plan is to start initiating these zone changes. Here's the order we'd like to do it in, and get your feedback. So that would be a collaborative process with the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. So we could make sure we had that political support before we started. And then once we have that, then we would systematically start engaging those groups and talking to them about what the next step is for that process. So establish that priority list with P&Z and City Council, and then start talking to the neighborhoods about what that looks like.
So on this slide that you've got up with the ongoing review, does that mean that the draft is available that includes everything from values to goals for all 3 plans? I know the downtown one is available, at least to a limited audience, but what about the master plan?
Yeah, the draft of the comprehensive master plan has been shared with the committees, and they're reviewing those. We haven't posted them online for public consumption because we want to make sure that it's as final as possible before we release it, because there's most likely going to be changes because they haven't provided that feedback yet. So they are out there, but we haven't shared them with the general public.
I guess what I'm thinking of is the walkability issue, since we wanted to talk about that. I'm just wondering if there's, because I thought that the draft that you presented at our joint meeting had some pretty strong opportunities to improve, connecting neighborhoods to retail, which are all really great ideas, and pointing out that it was challenging if you're someone that wants to walk in this town. And I'm just wondering if you're getting a lot of pushback about that.
Keith, do you want to speak on that? I think everybody generally agrees that having a walkable community is a positive thing. I think it's being strategic about where and how that's done. I think generally there's consensus that there should be key connections or strategic connections to certain neighborhoods and community services, but that doesn't mean that every single neighborhood needs to have a sidewalk on both sides. So those are that's where we're getting down to. It's like, okay, we all agree sidewalks are good. We all agree people should be able to walk to certain places, but where and how do those look? Because we want to make sure that we have the highest return on investment. So we want to make sure that people are actually going to utilize these sidewalk areas, and they're something that's going to be a high value to the community that they're located in versus just citywide, if that makes sense. And I can let Keith piggyback off that if you like. Does that sound like what we've heard?
Lena, you're in a better position to actually hear things on the ground on a day-to-day basis. People are probably reaching out to you and talking to you, but I have not heard any resistance from staff. And so we work with staff and we work with the committees to float these ideas across. And I have not heard any negative pushback on these topics at all. Some folks don't necessarily agree that they should have sidewalks in every neighborhood, and that's fine. So we're trying to create the policy and strategy language that's flexible enough and is achievable, right? You just don't have a lot of money to work with to put sidewalks out there in every neighborhood, but not every neighborhood wants sidewalks either. So what we're doing is we've gone through all of these little incremental boxes, if you will, on this graphic, at a level with staff to make sure technically we're making sure that everything makes sense. We're not making some serious mistake with some of the language we're putting out there. And we're getting staff to review it. We wanted to vet it through staff first, and that's not just Elena, but it's other departments as well. And then make refinements, and then make sure that it's now at a reasonable level where we can now officially get the entire draft document to the committees, both the downtown and the comp plan. That's where we are right now. We're making changes to some of the technical language that staff has provided to us, even as of Friday last week.
So are you going to be addressing the specific locations where you've identified, walkable connections need to be made, and which neighborhoods are not wanting that to be part of their future? Or are you just going to just generally suggest that we do a modal transportation study and figure that out in the future?
It's
Great
it's
question.
honestly, it's the latter, but I don't want it to sound like we're kicking the can down the road. There just needs to be a number of steps that goes from comprehensive plan discussion to implementing something in the ground. And some of those steps are doing an assessment study, a more detailed assessment study, identifying where those critical gaps are, understanding what your population needs are. There might be some folks in the community that absolutely need mobility improvements, and those areas might take precedence over other areas. So that gets into a transportation master plan, a needs assessment, a gap analysis, weighing what your revenues are in your community with capital improvement program strategies. That's why you get down into that specificity of a transportation mobility plan. But we might even be recommending things like North Street, looking at an overlay district on North Street, where you have all those commercial uses and you have discontinuous sidewalks and ADA ramps. You might want to look at the North Street as a corridor, as a high priority corridor, because you know that there's a lot of people that are using it from a vehicular standpoint, but they're also walking in the corridor, trying to get access to those businesses. So we're going to definitely be making recommendations to focus on specific areas as a part of your transportation plan.
Yeah, I think
I think
they've already done that.
Yeah, the sidewalks are on North Street. You probably need to make another trip down here and notice
They're
that.
building
but-
them as
Yeah.
we speak because they created an overlay.
Is that a,
So, good thinking, but,
excuse me, is that a TxDOT project?
Yes,
Well-
so the TxDOT, North Street is TxDOT roadway.
Right.
And there are some older sidewalks, but they're not very usable. Either they're the same grade as the driveway, so there's no distinction between the driveway and the sidewalk, or they're either not, they're not ADA compliant. And so not only are they building new sidewalks, but they're repairing some older ones. And so that's through grants that our city engineering department has partnered with TxDOT in, but it's not the entire section of North Street, it's just sections as funding becomes available. So there's still a big section of North Street to go, and South Street, we're gonna look at South Street too. And so, but I think what he's saying is those higher priority areas that have the most traffic and have the most use probably need to be improved first, so we can make sure they're adequate, and then move on to,
Makes
Sense.
Yeah.
What area, Maggie, just for curiosity and my own knowledge, what areas do you see that are not getting attention relative to sidewalks or need sidewalks?
well, I did some actually walking surveys with students 3 or 4 years ago, and the biggest thing I noticed is that a lot of people walk from neighborhoods into town. You can see the desire lines, but it's not so much that within each neighborhood, the streets, there's some needs there too, but the one that I always think of is going from Brooke Quinns Jones Elementary School down Power Street to North Street. There's worn paths there, because everybody in that neighborhood, a lot of people walk, and they're walking, that's where they're walking. So
City planner, may you?
that's just an example. But I think that
You're
somebody,
right, that makes
the
sense.
Capital Needs Committee has been talking about doing a modal transportation study because
Keith, are you aware that we have something like that going on right now with a capital needs assessment? Okay, I figured,
Yes.
yeah.
we're hoping to get some results of the comprehensive plan in time to at least pay attention to what's identified in the plan before we have to put it out.
So
We'll wrap it up.
I'm glad you mentioned the school, because one of the things that TxDOT looks at for these sidewalk projects are, you know, they call it missing routes to school. That's probably the wrong name, but basically prioritizing connections from schools to the neighborhoods that they serve. So making sure the kids can actually walk to school without walking through the street. So that's actually a whole separate project and grant that TxDOT utilizes. They also have available funding where we were looking online the other day, where not only will they pay for the actual improvements, but they'll actually pay for some of the upfront planning as well. If you have an updated plan that says we desire to have, you know, future multimodal networks, they'll actually help fund some of that upfront planning costs too.
Does the city have a grant writer? Because I
No.
heard they were gone. That we used to have one and we lost them and we didn't refund it.
We used to have a staff member that served as, she served in that capacity part-time. And then we tried to fill a full-time grant writer position, but we just weren't able to fill that position, so it's still vacant. Typically what happens is each department kind of does their own in-house grants for various projects. Main Street does a lot of historic grants, engineering does a lot of TxDOT grants, and so those are, get done within each department. We don't have a kind of overarching, we would love one, grant writer.
Can we not, can we not outsource it to a group?
So we're working with GrantWorks right now to help us with some of our bigger federal grants that have a lot of red tape. And so we do contract with them, and they end up but it's unique because those are typically for larger scale projects. But it would make sense to have an outsourced company that helps us with that. GrantWorks helps a lot of communities do grant writing and grant management. And so that's one of the big pieces. It's not just the grant writing, but actually managing the grant after the fact and making sure that you're doing all that paperwork and everything's compliant. But to answer your question, that's definitely an option to outsource that. But right now, we're able to at least provide some of it in-house. It's just not as effective as probably it could be.
Maggie, that could be something that we recommend to city council for a capital needs assessment. I did have was speaking to somebody about sidewalks today, and I swear it's not a topic every day, but they were talking about the Maroney area from high school down to Maroney and University, which is a high foot traffic area without sidewalks and busy roads. Something that I keep thinking about as well is high density areas, whatever that may mean in our city. But to have those areas where they can go to the grocery store is a big one, and back, and anything that's like basic necessities. And that's something to be thinking about. But on another note, besides sidewalk, and we'll get back to sidewalks in a little bit, but Keith, all the plans that you present to these cities, do you ever do a look back, like where are they now within 5 years? Because I know this is a common problem with accountability in terms of cities keeping up with actually using the standards as a guideline. You know, and that's one of the questions that I had. How many success rates do you see with cities that utilize the master plans and downtown master plans from you guys? Or just in general in your career?
Yeah, no, I mean, every community has different resources available to them, right? And that's a big issue. It's resources are staff, it's money, it's local collaboration, it's partnerships in the community. So every community is different that way. But what we found with the plans that we write, we want to make sure they're actionable. And so your previous plan was really robust. It was very deep, had a lot of information. It was hard to navigate. But one of the fundamental things that we find is that we pull out the very last item, these strategies, these actionable items. We pull them out of the body of the plan and create them as their own chapter. And as Elena mentioned earlier, be very specific about writing those actionable items as truly actionable, and that they're measurable, that they're prioritized. And we typically have 1 to 3 dots, if you will, short-term, high priority, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 6 to 10 years, lower priority. But then also be very specific about having a timeline associated with that, not just a priority, but a timeline. The code audit is a good example. Y'all just had a great conversation about that. The code audit is so important. That should be a super high priority. It should be done within the first year, and you should have a responsible agency, Elena, of Community Development Department, and you should put money aside to actually do that. If you don't do those things in this plan, then the likelihood of your plan being successful down the road becomes less and less. So you've got to back up the plan with the resources to actually achieve or go after your high priority items. The transportation plan, the gap analysis, the idea of a sidewalk inventory and analysis, making sure that those sidewalks on North Street, I know there's sidewalks there, but they're not all ADA compliant. Somebody that's wheelchair bound cannot have access to those businesses on the many parts of that corridor. So if that's a high priority corridor, or safe routes to school is what Elena was mentioning earlier, you want to make sure this plan talks about 15-minute neighborhood, safe routes to school, complete streets. Those things are really important. They sound fluffy, but they're really important because your grant writer is going to reference this and say, Nacogdoches adopted a complete streets policy in 2020, 23. That grant writer is going to use that information to write any number of grants to get money, because you can demonstrate you made a policy commitment to create that kind of environment in the public realm. It's really all linked together.
Yeah,
Makes
okay,
sense.
thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? You want to drop anything? Yeah.
Pardon?
You want to drop anything?
No, not this time, not this time.
Well, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
All right, no more questions of Keith?
Keith, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much,
All
Keith.
right,
That was
thanks,
really
Keith.
beneficial for us. And if you
My
have any
pleasure.
questions.
It's great working with you all. I'm looking forward to getting the plan in front of you so we can get your thoughts on it. So thank
Same.
you all.
Thank
sir.
you, Keith.
Thank
Have
you
a
for
good day.
joining us.
And thank you, Elena.
Moving on to work session B, presentation, discussion of various subdivision design standards.
All right. Elena Helton, City Planner. At our last meeting, we mentioned that there's been some requests to at least look at some alternative design standards for residential subdivisions, specifically when it comes to clustering or preserving our natural environment. And so today, we're going to talk about a couple different concepts and just very general, high level, and then get your feedback on and questions. And then if there's one in particular that you really like, that you want to learn more about, then we'll bring back and do an even more detailed presentation on that. And so with that, this is y'all's presentation, so please stop me along the way and ask any questions. I'll keep it very flexible like that. So, of course, let's start with a definition. What is a subdivision? A subdivision is a division of parcel of land, essentially into lots, blocks, or sites, sometimes with or without streets, for the purposes of sale, transfer of ownership, or development. That is the kind of bare minimum bones of a subdivision. Essentially, subdivisions are a way to track land, and it's been around since, subdivisions have been around for a long time, but when we talk about subdivision regulations, open space, parks, providing for some of those amenities, that's fairly new. But providing for regulations that provide streets, water, sewer, access, that's something that's been around since, as far as the invention of subdivision regulations and zoning. But what I want to get into today is the types of regulations that different cities have in regards to subdivisions, and because it does vary a lot. In essence, every city will regulate lot size, streets, water, sewer, but then all of those other things that talk about parkland and open space and access, those tend to vary from community to community based on the values of that entity. So unlike zoning, which is limited to city limits, subdivision regulations also can extend out into the ETJ, or extraterritorial jurisdiction. In our case, it's 2 miles. So 2 miles outside the city has authority to regulate subdivision of land. Outside of that, it's just Nacogdoches County. And so while we can't apply our zoning power outside the city, we can apply our subdivision authority up to 2 miles.
I'm sorry, 2 miles from the outer boundary?
City limits,
Of the city limits, yes, ma'am.
ETJ.
But I've seen maps of the ETJ,
Mhm.
and it doesn't look like a 2-mile buffer. So it's basically just a 2-mile buffer.
Yes, ma'am.
That's pretty generous.
It is. And a lot of it depends on the size of the population. So it varies based on the size of the community. Smaller cities have a smaller ETJ, larger cities have a larger one. But I'll double check that, but I believe ours is 2 miles.
Do people in the ETJ pay city taxes?
No.
But do they get city services?
Depends.
Do
if they have
they get
it-
fire
Yeah.
or
If it-
water or whatever?
If it's there.
Now, essentially, if you take a look at our subdivision regulations, they mirror those that the county has. So we, basically, we're helping the county enforce the subdivision regulations. And so they are one and the same. We've just kind of taken over that responsibility. So they don't have to go to two different boards for approval. They just come to the City Planning and Zoning Commission. But our regs for subdivisions are the same as that you'll see outside the county, except you don't apply zoning. So inside the city, you can have smaller lots. You can have more dense development. Out in ETJ, we require larger lots with larger street frontages.
When does the city decide to swallow up the ETJ and change their city limits?
So
How does that process work? 'Cause
Yes.
I hear that's in flux in the state legislature right now.
it is. So annexation is the process by which the city expands their boundaries. And basically, it's limited to your ETJ. So you can annex, the law says your annexation area is your extraterritorial jurisdiction. The law has changed over time. It seems like the last few sessions that we've had, they've limited city's authority to regulate or to annex property even further. So we've lost power over the years to annex property, and really it's a growth management tool. So it's a way for the city to kind of manage how it grows. And so if you have a lot of growth right outside the perimeters of your community, but you're not able to collect taxes on those, it really has an effect of decreasing your overall ability to provide quality services, because you're having to provide more services to more people, but with a smaller piggy bank. So you have more people who are benefiting from your water, your sewer, your streets, but they're not paying into the fund to help maintain those facilities. And so by annexing that into the city, you're able to make sure that the people who are using your facilities are helping share the cost of those facilities. And with the last session, essentially what they did is so that you no longer can have unilateral or involuntary annexation unless the property owner actually petitions the city to request it, or there's other tools that you can use, like 380 agreements. But unless it's by the permission of the property owner, we can't involuntarily annex people's property anymore unless it complies with very strict guidelines. And that was a big change for the last session. And this year, I think there's some new bills that have been filed, and the city's actually working on trying to at least help the city expand that authority along our I-69 corridor, because we know that's going to be a big commercial push. And so we want to at least be able to control that area of the city, even if we're not allowed to control annexation citywide or our boundaries citywide.
How can the city grow if they can't annex? I mean, that's like saying no cities can grow anymore because people aren't going to voluntarily want to be annexed.
Well, I think this comes from, when you look at these larger cities like San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, I think there was there was the perception that some of these larger cities were abusing their annexation authority and just gobbling up nearby properties or nearby neighborhoods, because there was so much development happening that it was pouring out into the periphery of the community. And so in response, the state will pass a law to address issues from a couple of select communities, but it applies statewide. So they can't just say, okay, well, we're going to limit your authority to you city or you city. It has bigger impacts. And so what I think, based on my experience, is that you have communities who abuse their authority a little bit, and so all cities can get their hands slapped because we're not following really the intent of the state law. But that's just been my perception based on the things that I've seen come through with these last couple of sessions that we've had. It does make it very difficult to manage your growth, because if you can't expand and provide for that tax base, then how are you supposed to support your existing facilities when they're providing services for much more than just your base, just more than your tax base?
I mean, I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. I mean, it is, that's high level, but I mean, there's a balance of property rights, obviously. I mean, I own land and real estate inside the ETJ, but the city doesn't provide me anything. Wish they would, because the services, there's just no services there, but they don't. So if you start doing, if you start annexing, assuming that you could, the city doesn't have the money to invest in the infrastructure to annex it, because they would have to provide those services.
Chicken and egg.
Oh,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
I mean, that's one quandary.
yeah,
Does
and we have.
Does the city routinely deny service to people in the ETJ, or is it just a hit or miss kind of situation where some have services and some don't?
Well, I'll speak a little bit to it. I wish our city engineer was here, but he had another obligation. But essentially, we used to have a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? Flexible policy as far as extending public infrastructure outside the city limits. But since we've kind of we've gone through this process where we've had to do a deep dive into our infrastructure needs, we realized we can't keep doing that. We can't keep extending infrastructure outside the city when we have no way for those people who are using it to help maintain it. And so we have actually denied or just said, hey, we're not interested in extending those facilities anymore unless you want to annex. And that's been something fairly new in the last couple of years that we've done because our infrastructure needs have become such an issue. So the city has a choice in that. We have a say. We don't have to extend it. We have in the past, but we're starting to limit that so we can make sure that we're taking care of ourselves first before we extend outside the city.
Gotcha.
Well, it does seem fair. If you want the city to provide you services, that you should pay part of that.
I mean, I
you
think
know.
I've heard Steve say that numerous times, that particularly along the West Loop, if there's services there and fire and rescue and law enforcement, people have to pay into the kitty for that.
Well, and I think
Makes
the
sense.
idea was eventually we would annex those.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't as of concern, but with the last few sessions, we realized, okay, that could never happen. And so we need to be more conservative with how we decide to extend those facilities.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, subdivision regulations. Second only to zoning as far as importance to communities. Once property is properly zoned for that use, then the property can be subdivided to facilitate that activity. So common provisions that are included in subdivision regulations are the actual platting procedures and controls, design regulations, layouts of streets, utilities, drainage. Additional regulations that you'll see from community to community include sidewalks and bike paths as a subdivision improvement, so things that are actually built with the subdivision of the property. Private utilities are also included, even though the city doesn't build them, we like to know where they're gonna go. So power, gas lines, cable, and that's to make sure there's no interference with other public utilities. And then reservations or easements for open space. Oftentimes you'll see neighborhoods that have a detention pond that's being used for their drainage, but they'll also use it as a amenity for common open space, and they'll make it beautified with sidewalks and trees. So it's an easement, it's open space, but it also serves as a public drainage facility. So just an example of some of those different regulations.
But just to clarify, our subdivision ordinances do not require sidewalks, bike paths. I don't know about the landscaping
Correct.
or open space, isn't that correct?
Yes, ma'am. So
Currently.
yes, so our subdivision regulations include layouts for streets, drainage, public utilities like water and sewer, but they do not provide for construction of sidewalks, bike paths, or mandatory landscaping or open space.
Thanks.
You're welcome. All right, so the first concept we're going to look at is cluster subdivisions or conservation subdivisions. A cluster subdivision, also known as an open space subdivision, is a technique allowing for the modification of dimensional requirements, so lot width, lot depth, lot area, of the zoning ordinance to group or cluster lots at a higher density on the most suitable portion of the land. So the idea is that you allow flexibility in your lot size and lot configuration, so you can group them together in order to preserve areas that are natural or scenic in quality, or they have some sort of environmental value, like floodplain or drainage and so on and so forth. So the idea is you have the same lot yield in the end, so the developer doesn't lose out on any of his developable lots, but some of those vary in size, and some of them are smaller, medium, or larger, depending on the layout. So it helps the developer by making sure that they maintain the same lot yield, and also helps at the same time preserve open space and improve the overall drainage facilities of the area. So this is just an example of one type of subdivision or residential design that allows for a variety of housing types and lot sizes while maintaining kind of the natural environment and scenic beauty of an area.
So we could adopt this right now. We could have a new zoning classification. It would be perfect for the example I was talking about where there's a lot of, wetland and stream and everything, but you could still get And the pictures I saw, that which you haven't gotten to yet,
Yeah.
they look like really nice developments, and they would be affordable.
A lot,
Whether or not they're profitable to the developer, I don't know, but.
a lot of cities have this as an option in their subdivision regulations that's allowed by right. So you may have an R1 cluster subdivision or R2 cluster subdivision. So it could be that instead of having a separate zoning category, you just have this as a separate set of design guidelines by right, if that's what the chooser decides, if that's what the builder decides he wants to do. So it's like an optional.
So then the spacing and the square footage setbacks and all that would be unique to this.
Mm-hmm. And so that would be something that we would, it would be reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission and approved by City Council as an amendment to our ordinance as it stands today. So it'd be a change to the subdivision ordinance, and that would be reviewed by this body and approved by council. So we would have workshops and talk about very specifics as to what that means as far as open space and percentage and lot dimensions and how that looks. And so it would be a collaborative process to establish those design standards if that's something that P&Z wanted to take forward.
I've asked this question before. Do we have an impervious cover regulation here?
We do for commercial and multifamily development, essentially non-single family development. If you have a project that includes, I believe the threshold, I'm going to say this wrong, is anywhere from 14 to 20,000 square feet of impervious area, and that includes your rooftops, your driveways, parking lots, anything that essentially isn't grass or dirt that water can get through is considered impervious. If you exceed a certain square footage of that, then the ordinance says you have to provide on-site drainage and detention to make sure that you don't have any adverse impacts to your adjacent properties. And so the idea is you detain anything that's over that and allow it to release slowly, so that way it matches the same water flow as what's going on in the area, so that you don't have a sudden rush in water or a sudden increase in water flow. And I wish I was an engineer and I could
It has to match the pre-construction
Mhm.
flow rate.
correct.
I mean, like, I know we've done some development in West Austin and there, I mean, it's like a 20, you build on an acre, it's just 25, 75. So essentially, everything else has to remain natural in whatever state that is.
Yeah, and that's
So-
different than lot coverage. And so a lot of cities will have a lot coverage a maximum that says you can't cover your lot with any more than a certain percentage of impervious. And that's separate from detention for commercial and
Right.
non-residential. So you could have an ordinance that said for single-family lots, there's a 50% maximum lot coverage, which meant your driveway, your patio, your parking, all that couldn't exceed 50% to ensure that at least 50% is left open and pervious. And so you could do that for different zoning districts, apply different ratios, and that could kind of stand alone from your drainage requirements.
I mean,
And some communities have a drainage fee, and it's based on the amount of impervious surface that the property has. And that's what funds your drainage works.
It's like impact fees.
Yeah.
And so a lot of cities who have built brand-new, shiny drainage infrastructure, as property develops along that corridor or along that area, they will assess impact fees to those adjacent properties to help pay for the cost of those drainage facilities. Yeah, so the idea is you pay as you go. So the impact of your development is directly related to the fees you pay because the city's building infrastructure to offset that. And so there's, you can do that with streets, street maintenance fee, water impact fee, sewer impact fees, parkland dedication fees. There's lots of cities who do that in lieu of them building the infrastructure up front, or if they've already built that infrastructure, they're trying to recoup that cost, that's another way to do that. So if we had a huge CIP project where we totally redid all the drainage on North Street, we could assess impact fees to the adjacent properties to try to recoup some of that cost. But I'm getting into the weeds now for some of the
talking about a lot of
financial
fees, a lot of
things.
fees.
So, yes, it's just a concept. It's nothing to do with cluster residential subdivision
They'll
regulations.
throw eggs at us and tomatoes up
Yeah.
here, so, yeah, no.
Well, that's just what some communities do.
No, I'm just
Mhm.
kidding. It's recorded, so I'm trying to
Yeah.
distance myself from it.
Casey ever wants to run for office.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's many benefits to cluster subdivisions. One of the most obvious ones is it helps prevent the overdevelopment of natural drainage features, of beautiful scenic areas the city wants to preserve as part of a quality of life feature. It allows for the development of smaller lots and higher density in areas that are more appropriate while maintaining character of a general neighborhood. So these could act as a transition area. If you have an area that is dominated by large lot, single-family development, and you wanted something in transition to that, in a more dense area, this could be a good example of something that could be compatible, something kind of in between, that would maintain the same lot yield while providing diversity in the same neighborhood. So we also talk about aging in place, or being an aging community. One of the benefits of something like this is it allows you to move within the neighborhood without leaving the neighborhood. So think of your starter homes, you have a family, you need a larger home, your kids move out of the house, you can downgrade back to a smaller house without leaving your neighborhood. So that's another benefit of a neighborhood like this, or a design like this. Any questions about?
Well, since this is completely optional and it's not something that you're forcing on anybody, it just seems like it would add a lot of options, because, the options that we have for zoning right now are so limited, and they really do constrict what people can do, and I think this is great.
Well, but they could do this now.
No, they couldn't
Sure
because
they
of
could.
setbacks. The setbacks would prevent them from putting single-family houses this close together
My
for
neighborhood, they're
R1.
6 feet apart.
Well, that's because it's a PD.
Yeah.
See, people don't want to do PDs.
Well, for a traditional subdivision, typically they're all zoned the same zoning district. So they're all R1 or they're all R2.
Right.
And so those all have minimum lot sizes. And so you couldn't do anything smaller than that, smaller than the minimum.
But you could do cluster housing in a PD,
You could.
right?
You could.
There's no
Yeah.
reason you couldn't do that now, if you
Yes.
wanted to.
Correct. You'd have to go through the zoning process,
Yeah.
have a development plan that
That's
gets
more
approved by
pain.
council. It is more risk on the front end because you have to get those additional zoning approvals and have some designs
Plans.
set out. The benefit of the cluster subdivision is that it provides the same overall density. So you may increase density in a portion of a neighborhood, but not the overall. And it would allow you to, depending on how you implemented it, it would provide for smaller single-family lots than what we would allow today by right.
Right.
Like smaller lots than any of our single-family zonings would allow by right. So instead of a 50-foot lot width, you could have a 40 or 35-foot, and you would set those maximums or minimums in your code. And so something like this could be allowed in a larger subdivision where the smallest lot was like 5,000 square feet, without any additional zoning approvals, but it would be hard to do like a more
Well,
dense
The other
pocket.
issue, it seems to me you would have, is that if you've got this big empty space, or, whatever you want to call it, somebody's got to take care of that. Which means that obviously the city's not going to be responsible for taking care of that unless you deed it all to the city as parkland, which probably the developer's not likely to do. But that means that you've got to then create an HOA and charge HOA fees so that somebody is paying
Yeah.
to have that taken care of.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And so it does create a little bit more complicated process because people who are just wanting to subdivide and sell and then let go of the project,
Right.
it's more difficult when you have to establish these boards or these processes for future maintenance of a subdivision. And so it is more, timely, it is more involved. Anytime you have a common area that has to be maintained privately, it creates a little bit more technical issues. And so you're absolutely right. In this case, we would be looking for the creation and require the creation of a HOA with language that allowed them to essentially create fees or assess fees in order to maintain it. Because the last thing you want is for it to turn into a swamp area that's not maintained and becomes dangerous and a liability to the city. So that's a good point.
So that would that's the only mechanism to address having the open space and the common areas in a development like that?
Yes, ma'am.
Unless the city wanted to make a park out of it, which you can't count on that.
No, and the thing is, the city has limited staff, and so it's great to have parks, but if you don't have the staff to maintain them and take care of them, well, that can create another issue.
So Is Ruth right in that you could do this now without any kind of creating a new zoning category?
Well, it depends. So there's nothing that says a developer can't, maintain and preserve an area of a subdivision for future aesthetics or future drainage or what have you. Anyone can do that today. What wouldn't be allowed is having this variety of lot sizes within the same zoning district. And so that's the key, is the flexibility in having smaller lots in the same zoning district without having to do planned development or a PD. And it's because lot size is based on your zoning.
So the city would designate a conventional or cluster area zone?
No, so the city would say,
So would someone have to come forward and want it?
so this would be an optional thing that a developer could choose to participate in if they wanted to. That's how a lot of cities treat it, as something that's, is more of like a strategy to encourage this type of development by allowing the flexibility in lot size and variety in housing types.
So let's just say for argument's sake that the two orange areas on the cluster example here, let's say that they were gonna be little townhouses that were duplex style townhouses. How would you create a zoning category that would allow for that? I mean, could you? Because
You
I don't
could.
see a problem with that. I mean, it's.
Yeah, we've talked about, with the comp plan committee, we've talked about creating new zoning districts for mixed use, for mixed residential use, that would allow for a variety of different residential housing types in the same neighborhood. Because right now, we don't have that.
Right.
You either have like R1 or R2, and sometimes they're close together, but
But it's not planned.
it's not planned, yeah. And so you could create a zoning district that would allow those things. Now, interestingly enough, our R4 district allows for single family and townhome and duplex, but then we run into the issue of people choosing that zoning district because they want the flexibility, but then that doesn't provide a lot of assurances for the neighbors about what's gonna get built. So if someone comes forward and they're like, well, I wanna request R4 so I can do small lot subdivisions, well, once it's zoned, then they can do whatever they want. So it would be beneficial to create a zoning district that didn't allow, straight up multifamily, but allowed for what we call missing middle, for a different variety of housing types that wasn't high density, but wasn't low density, was something in the middle, so that as the property develops, you have a choice of what can be built within that area. And it gets more complicated than that. Whenever you have a category like that, you always want to make sure that you're providing context-sensitive design, so that you're not going in and gentrifying an area and totally changing the character of it. And so usually these areas are these zoning districts, whenever they're requested, it's very strategic. Okay, we want this area to be zoned this to allow for this type of infill development that we're missing, or we want to allow this zoning in this area to create more options for revitalization or make it easier to redevelop. So mixed-use zoning is great because it provides for flexibility, but it doesn't belong everywhere. So it's something that's got to be,
Well, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, one of the things that people really like about the feel of Nacogdoches is these expansive lots. You drive through and it's like, wow, Nacogdoches, you go on Reggae, it's like, wow, look at these lots. But as your city becomes more and more densely packed, or you run out of room to actually build upon, this is where these things tend to come into play. But if we do actually look at the whole vision of Nacogdoches and where those specific things go, it does make sense in one area to have, like we are talking about, multi-stage family homes, small homes to larger homes, and within this one community with preservation of natural beauty. I mean, it's just an inevitability, I think, for any city that we were running out of room in the city to build homes. And so it's a great use, an option that a planner might not even think about. And I think it's great that we can adopt it and just, run with it.
I mean, we don't really have anything to lose by adopting it. It's just another option. But I'm sorry, as you point out, you don't want to just throw it anywhere, so that would have to be.
It seems to me if it's a new development, this is
Great.
essentially but it's a de facto planned development.
and then this is better for greenfield. This really isn't
Right.
as good for infill
Right.
development, but this is for, green pastures where there's lots of opportunity and flexibility in the design and layout. This is really for that type of development, not where you're kind of restricted by what's built around you.
But the city's gonna require whoever's coming to develop that to have a plan to address it, so.
Well, any subdivision needs a plan.
Right.
Over a certain size, right? I can't remember the size cutoff, but.
Yeah, so we do require preliminary plans for larger subdivisions where you're gonna be laying out streets and water and sewer. I mean, those get approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission, because we wanna make sure that, you know, you're not creating any kind of, issue where you have landlocked tracts or portions that can't be developed. And so you gotta have a layout that shows your kind of end result to make sure that it's a workable plan. But to answer your question, yes, this could be something that's adopted as an optional regulation, so we're not requiring it, but it's available if a developer chose to go that route, especially if you have a lot of creeks or floodplains.
I'm probably backtracking, but for clarification, I think, the question earlier, did you ask, if the developer is going to request this? That's where it begins. It's not going to be the,
Yeah, and so a
Yeah.
developer would say, hey, I have a 100-acre tract that's really encumbered by this large creek area. I want to do, maybe at first they want to do planned development to allow for smaller lots. Well, we had a provision in our ordinance that allowed that by right, through, you know, as long as you complied with A, B, and C, well, that would help eliminate the upfront zoning process that they have to go through. And then PDs expire as well. So if you have a PD that expires, you have to go through that process all over again.
so that wouldn't look like, it wouldn't be the same kind of, rezoning approach, right? It would just be like, we're adding this, or, a developer would say, I would like to add this to what's already, what it's already zoned as, right?
Yeah, so we could present this as an option for a developer, and then they would go through the Planning and Zoning Commission to get their preliminary plat approved, but they wouldn't be going to city council and asking special permissions for the reductions in lot width or.
Variances.
It's
Neat.
modifying our plan development essentially, making it a little bit more user-friendly.
Yeah,
So the undeveloped area in this diagram, what if the developer said, well, I'm just gonna develop where the lots are in the streets, I'm not gonna do anything with that property, it's in the 100-year floodplain, I'm not gonna cut down any trees or put benches there or anything. Would they still, I mean, you know, we have a lot of territory like that in town, right, that's just undeveloped, so would they be forced to develop it to a certain standard?
so say for example, we adopted this cluster residential subdivision standards, and someone came forward and said that they would want to do that. One of the things that we would include in that ordinance, and there's several things to make this work. So one is to allow for the flexibility in lot sizes to cluster, so you have the same lot yield. But one is to ensure that the open space actually is preserved as open space. So that could be done through easements, through preservation easements of the open space area, through deed restrictions. And so oftentimes you'll see those flexibility, you'll see that flexibility in design coupled with preservation easements to protect those open areas to make sure they aren't developed in the future.
But what about the maintenance issue that Ruth brought up?
Yeah, so as part of any subdivision that has an HOA that is going to be properly maintaining open space, you'll have a set of requirements and guidelines that says, you know, you agree to maintain this property in A, B, and C condition. It could say a lot of different things, but essentially you have to codify it and require it and say, hey, if you're going to do this kind of development, here's what you have to do, including preservation easements, language that talks about who maintains it, what kind of condition they maintain it in. There's lots of different things that you could build into it. You would build that into the ordinance.
I see.
And you said earlier that, or I guess I'm asking for clarification. Didn't you say that the just because it's a cluster, that would automatically require the development of an HOA, the creation of an HOA?
Yeah, if someone was going to do a cluster where they were preserving this common open space, we would ensure they had an HOA, so they would provide documents that showed that they've created that.
So it would be based on what they were planning to do with it, not just the fact that it was, I guess I misunderstood
Yeah,
that.
well, and you know, it really depends. Every city's different. Every set of ordinances that you read are different. We could include as much language as we wanted to make sure that, you know, there were some assurances provided that it was going to be maintained in good quality working order, that the aesthetics were maintained. You could add language in there to make sure that you were comfortable with what's being done. And there's lots of different examples out there. There's some cities who do a good job of this kind of thing that we could use as a model for future ordinance amendments. We don't have to recreate the wheel.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elena, this is great.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to cover some of the stuff we talked about in later slides, so it may make for a quicker presentation. The second concept we're going to talk about is cottage housing. It's a little similar in that it does combine smaller lots with preservation of open space. So cottage housing is a form of smaller scale single-family development. It provides for a diversity of housing choice and alternatives to your kind of traditional detached single-family homes. Essentially, it features a cluster of homes or units, typically between 4 and 12, around a common open space. And so here you see a nice landscaped green space with sidewalks around it. So this isn't necessarily for areas that have floodplain or drainage, but it could just be for a flat piece of property that doesn't have any kind of development challenges, but wanted to provide kind of a community feel and something that was different from your typical day-to-day detached single-family subdivisions. And so the appropriateness of these areas may vary depending on the location. They don't belong everywhere, but they could provide, again, diversification in housing types, some variety and different types of, not just housing types, but neighborhood types and how people want to live. You see this commonly in age-restricted communities or senior housing, where people want to feel a sense of community, where they want to really be close to their neighbors. So the front porches are typically a requirement of this type of development, so that way you have that engagement between the street and the homes. These also can fill properties that are maybe larger in size, so it's good for greenfield, but also could be good for infill development. I think I have a good picture here. And so you may have a, yeah, so you may have a subdivision that's partially built out, but maybe there's one section that's not finished yet. Well, this could fill in that section of the subdivision, or the end of a street. You could have, so it doesn't have to be this large-scale 200-acre production. These could fit very well into existing neighborhoods without creating any kind of adverse impacts or any kind of compatibility issues, because they can be single-family, and they can meet the character of single-family neighborhoods, but just a little bit different. They do require HOAs to maintain the common open space. And again, these are typically done through PDs, but some cities do have a separate kind of cottage home development design guideline, kind of like the cluster, that allow people to do this by right, but there are design challenges. So parking is always an issue in these types of developments. So typically you'll see like common parking areas, if it's not detached to the actual home, or if it's not attached to the actual home. So if you don't have a garage attached, you'll see common areas for not only resident parking, but also guest parking as well. And they have to be part of a cohesive development. So you have to have an upfront plan that lays out everything. They can't be piecemeal. So just like a cluster subdivision, you have to spend a little time and money up front designing your plan to make sure all those working parts are going to work well together.
I can see that being a really good design for senior living, close proximities and golf carts with each other, you know.
I'm almost there.
So am I. But it's great for infill. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
You got little kids, you got a long way to go.
Oh, really? Oh, man.
Yeah, and so just like you said, this can accommodate smaller households, starter homes, people who are wanting to downsize, maybe not have so much maintenance as they did whenever they had 3 kids in the house. So it's just another tool to diversify your housing stock and provide something different than what we typically see with our detached single-family homes. So the other one we're going to look at is small lot subdivisions. And so these are your townhomes, your patio homes, your row houses. These have great potential to encourage density and housing diversity in areas that are typically dominated by single-family housing on large lots. They also work well in infill projects. So we have a lot of neighborhoods where they're primarily built out, but you have these kind of sections where you have 2 or 3 lots that are empty. And so what you put in there, because a lot of these neighborhoods are older, so some of the development that's actually there doesn't comply with our current zoning code, and they're smaller than what our code would allow today. And so this could be used to kind of infill properties that have the same kind of development pattern in that neighborhood already. So neighborhoods that already have kind of smaller lots with smaller homes, where maybe those lots, in order to be developed, would need a variance. Well, they could do a small lot subdivision and infill those by right without having to jump through all these zoning hoops and zoning approvals. In our ordinance, we don't have a minimum home size, we have minimum lot size. And so the home size is based on the building code, not the zoning code. Some cities have minimum building home sizes. We don't have that, thank goodness. I think it could be a good thing or bad thing. But essentially, this just allows for diversity in housing and also allows for affordability in the community while maintaining character of existing neighborhoods. Because they, when someone comes in to develop a subdivision, they base the home price based on the price of the lot. So a smaller lot, smaller price, smaller home, and vice versa. So these are great for starter homes, for small families, for aging population that wants to downsize. It also is less cost as far as infrastructure, because you can have more lots on the same section of street. So your offsets your water, sewer, and your utilities, and they can be done very well. You can actually adopt additional design guidelines just for this type of development. Where I've seen this done well is cities who have requirements for average setbacks or average lot size, where you look at what's there today on the street and the average setbacks, and that's your setbacks. So your building setbacks and your building requirements are based on what's there in the neighborhood today. And so it could vary based on what street you're on. And so there's lots of different things that you can do to make sure that this type of development is compatible with other areas. And so there's another option. I thought these were super cute. And so if done well, they can really be big benefit for the community, and maybe make that first time home buyers step not so big. They're trying to invest in their neighborhood.
So this is something, Elena, thank you for presenting all of this, because this is something I was thinking about when we had the case that was heard on Maroney on one of those areas for planned development, is something in my mind of doing things like this. And I know it's up to the property owner and what they actually want to do or how they want to sell it. But has any developer come up to you and requested any information about doing something like this at all?
Not specifically since I've been here. I have come across a couple of PDs that almost qualify as small lot subdivisions. They're essentially patio homes or a smaller patio home that we wouldn't allow by right today. So you do have a few examples of those that have been done through a planned development. But since I've been here in 2000, I haven't seen any, but that doesn't mean that we haven't had interest like that in the past.
Okay. Because we are so short of affordable housing. I mean, I think it's everywhere, but, clearly in our region, and we all know it's a huge disparity, and we need to be able to provide those, and I just can't imagine that a developer coming in wouldn't see the vision of this and actually make the ability to be profitable in some regards for it.
Yeah. I think we have, one of the benefits of having local developers is that they understand the community, they understand the needs of the community and the context. You go to school with them, you see them at the grocery store, your kids play soccer together. But the downside of that is there's not a lot of creativity. When it comes, they build the same thing over and over again,
Right.
and it sells, so that's what they build.
Right.
And so sometimes you have to provide a little education to your development community, is to show them what's possible. This is
Right.
what you could do. This is what you could be built, if the code allowed it.
Right.
And so it's all about working with our developers to say, hey, this is another housing option that you could provide that people aren't buying because you're not building it. And whenever I worked in North Texas, that was always something that would come up, because we would talk to people about building townhomes or more flexible housing options. And the argument was, well, they're buying all these single-family homes that we're building. Well, that's because that's what you're building.
Yeah.
If you go to the grocery store and all you see are apples, you're going to get apples.
Yeah.
If there's oranges, maybe I'll buy an orange. I don't know, but I want the option.
Right.
And so it's just one of those things where it's almost like if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
But if you don't build it, of course, no one's going to buy it.
Right.
So it's a chicken or egg.
I mean, these are two, oh, go ahead.
No,
I was just gonna say, these are two different houses, obviously.
Yeah.
Much different, but I think anyone who's looking at a first-time home would consider
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
So quality matters, I mean, when we talk about these small lot
Right.
subdivisions. So it's not just about lot size and setbacks, it's things like porches and landscaping and fencing and stoops, all those.
Out of order.
Sorry.
At least I'm not the only one, okay? Well, I'm so bad.
And it's spam.
So I just think this is so important because
Stop.
like what's going on at the controversy over the development at the end of Logansport, it's not about single versus multiple family. It's about maintaining the character of the neighborhood. And unfortunately, the zone, we can't we can't do that with the present zoning. We can't do both things, multiple family and maintaining the character of the neighborhood, with the present zoning and design standards that we have. And what I really like about what you said was that this zoning can be, the ordinances can be written in such a way that, yes, you can build smaller homes and you can have smaller setbacks and lot sizes, but in the end, it's gonna maintain the character of the neighborhood and be consistent with whatever architecture and stuff is going on there. I think we need this. I think all three of the ideas you presented, and like you said, if they're there and they're available, the builders will at least consider them and ask about them. Right now, they complain about the lack of flexibility in the zoning. Remember, we heard that? I think it was the joint meeting.
It was a
but-
joint meeting.
Yeah, they want more flexibility too, so maybe they haven't considered these ideas because they know they could never build them here, so.
Well, and a lot of the conversations that we have with people about duplex and smaller family homes, they realize that unless they want to do a PD, like a planned development, R4 is the other alternative because it
Right.
allows it. But R4 also allows all those other things. So in an ideal world, you would have an R4-like district that didn't allow for actually apartment buildings, but allowed for a higher density, single-family construction or a higher density.
Or an apartment building that looks like the character of the neighborhood and doesn't look like a Motel 6.
Yeah.
Because right now, I mean, I don't know what's gonna go in down there, but it could look like a Motel 6. And that would ruins the character of that neighborhood, in my opinion. So it's not the developer's fault, and it's not the neighborhood's fault. It's
It's
just that we don't have the options and the requirements.
Let me ask you a question about the thing on Logansport. He's talking about building 20-plus rooms, but only having parking for half that many. He can't do that, can he?
So, I can't get into the details of that case because it's pending a future agenda item for a separate board. But essentially, there's duplexes being proposed on that property. But beyond that, I can't get too much in the weeds about it because it is pending a request from our zoning board.
Yeah, and
I'm
I don't
sorry.
wanna draw us into that either.
Yeah,
I just
bring it up
I
as
just
an
hate to see
example.
cars parked in Pecan Park because they got nowhere else to park.
Yeah, and that street needs some upgrades
To be
too,
wide,
so-
or have curb and gutter.
But
Yeah,
the
a lot
point
of- lot of
is that
issues.
maintaining the character of the neighborhoods is really important for maintaining what Nacogdoches is. Because like you said, people come here and they're like, wow.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not even the lot size always, it's the architecture and the, everything.
Yeah, because you could have a multifamily building that doesn't look like a multifamily building. So design matters, access matters, parking matters, but you have to codify that in order to develop it. And sometimes it's difficult because there's not a one-size-fits-all. But if you have a set of design standards that speaks to, okay, we want to make sure that any new infill is compatible with, adjacent homes in the area, you could be specific to that instead of saying it's citywide. Areas that designated as infill have to comply with this. And so there's a lot of different tools in the toolkit. You just have to go through and figure out based on the priorities of the city, what do we want to achieve and how do we achieve that? And so we can bring forward all kinds of examples of how that's been done in other communities and how that looks as far as code, and bring that forward for review.
But it starts with a vision. It starts with what?
Maggie, you've identified an opportunity, so
I was just gonna
you ought to
say.
be a developer and go do this, because I'm sure you would sell them like hotcakes.
You think?
I think so.
I think so. I think anybody that would come in because we need
You
it.
wanna bankroll me? So what's the next step for moving this forward? I realize that we can't just snap our fingers and make it happen, but what would the next step be to?
Well, we could have a similar presentation with city council and say, hey, we had a discussion with Planning and Zoning Commission about alternative design standards for single-family subdivisions. Here's the feedback that we heard from the commission based on what we presented. What's the general feedback on that? Do you like any of these? Do you not? I think the cluster subdivision is an easy win, especially if it's optional. And because before we bring back red lines of an ordinance, we want to make sure we get the city council feedback too.
Yeah.
So that could be the next step is based on what you guys want to see brought back, get that council feedback, and then
we have a lot of great builders in this community, and they build great products. But does the city actually outreach to builders and have a collaborative meeting and say, look, these are really cool ideas that you can do as a stakeholder, we can do as a city stakeholder? Maybe there's incentives, maybe there's not. But
We
it
do on
seems
some
right now that we're
projects.
the city of Nacogdoches is something is presented, the city reacts to it, there's no
Right.
proactive approach to it. I know we have a NEDCO, and we try to go out and solicit businesses to look to Nacogdoches, but do we solicit builders to entertain unique neighborhoods or developments, et cetera?
I'm not sure that we've done that in the past, but it's something that I think could be valuable and that we could look at. I've worked in communities where they had like a builder's breakfast every month. You invite the builders with coffee and donuts, and you talk about what's going on in the city and possible updates to the code and what they think about that. And so more like a just regular standing meeting just to get their feedback and update them on just city goings on. But I think that's something that we could definitely work with our inspections office to see if there's any kind of interest in that. Especially as we start to update our zoning code, we're gonna wanna bring those people in early, start talking to them about, okay, what are your issues that you're having whenever you're building? How can we help address those and work together? So we're definitely gonna have those in the future when we start looking at the updates to the zoning code, but we can start that now, especially if there's a specific housing type that we know we wanna encourage or promote, and maybe we haven't seen that built here. Maybe people don't know how to build it, or they need some help in figuring out how they can.
They haven't thought of it.
Well,
They just
right, I
haven't
mean, I
thought
think you
about it.
bring, there may be a cost, I mean, this thing here may be 500,000, who knows? I mean, and the builders, so they're the subject matter experts relative to cost, but it
Yeah.
would be interesting it never hurts to put people around a table and talk about the future. Cause
Sure.
it's as beneficial to builders because they wanna obviously attract people to the community, like we wanna bring in businesses and folks and have these affordable housing or at least options of housing. But they know what they don't know, right?
Right. So, I don't know if this is appropriate, but I'm gonna make a motion and that's a recommendation that you present this to city council and, have a separate meeting, like breakfast or presentation to builders. Because I think their feedback is really important. There could be things we're not thinking of
Yeah.
that are really important to address.
Yeah.
And anyway, just to keep the ball rolling and to keep the subject in front of everyone.
Okay,
I like that. Just love to hear what they say.
Yeah.
Okay,
Doesn't hurt.
all right.
Do we have you make a motion, do we have a second to the motion? Do we need to second that motion?
Yes.
Yeah, so do we have a second to
Second.
the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say same.
Thank you so much.
Cool.
Thanks, Elena.
Thank you. That was
very.
really good. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah,
I
thank you.
enjoyed that. I
Um,
did too. I
If you-
second
If you want
that,
to talk about like financing stuff, we can get into the weeds of that too, but I'll bring finance people to the meeting to make sure we can answer those questions, because there's all different types of ways to fund things and ways to, create catalyst projects, but it's so broad that I think I could talk generally about it, but not enough to like get into the weeds, you know what I mean?
Well, we definitely need to be an advocate to folks who want to spend money in this community and build, and we need to be an advocate for those that are looking for those various levels of homes and,
I can see so many starter families, college graduates that like to stay and need that type of housing, families that get
It's all-
established there.
it's all intertwined. I mean,
It's
we
so
want
intertwined.
businesses to come here, we want this community to grow responsibly or evolve responsibly, so yeah, I think it's great.
Well, and homeownership is really important to the city council, so any way to make that easier for people to achieve that and start building that equity, I think is a plus too. So it also helps kind of achieve that homeownership gap.
Also, when you say multifamily housing, what pops into most people's minds, I think, is that brick apartment building, that Motel 6 kind of look. And it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, they could look like that and just be duplexes, and so that would be helpful too. Anyway, great.
Moving on to item 7, city council decisions on planning zoning cases.
Do we have an item
Yes.
7?
I mean, there's, both of them were, do we need to read them or anything?
No, since city council approved the specific use permit for the accessory dwelling unit on East Parker Road, They also approved the zone change for that 2.7 acres, the property that was just annexed for Jake Crawford's future subdivision. So those were approved unanimously, and that's all.
Well, it's nice to see, I mean, we're doing something right, so. We'll go ahead and, number 8, just discussion, possible action on future agenda items. Does anyone have anything outside of what we already discussed?
Nope.
Maggie,
No,
anything
I
else?
don't.
Okay, and with that, we'll adjourn.
Thank you.